Welcome back. Today we're looking at a piece that offers a really aggressive critique of political commentators, specifically Tucker Carlson.
Right. It's about that flawed comparison he made between the death of Charlie Kirk and the police shooting of Renee Good.
Exact. The piece argues Good's death was a direct consequence of her own choices. So, let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the core principle, this idea of intellectual honesty and accountability, the author just nails. It's powerful. But the overall impact of that strong central critique is, it's getting significantly diluted by these really rapid, wide-ranging pivots to unrelated global conflict.
Yeah, it gets a little sprawling.
It does. The writer clearly wants to dismantle Carlson's whole idea that, the Minnesota shooting, Venezuela, Gaza, that they're all somehow connected.
But in doing that, they fall into a trap.
They do, by trying to refute every single topic. Maduro, the ceasefire, Ukraine. The analysis it loses the thread.
It becomes a list of geopolitical grievances instead of that focused surgical analysis of the rhetorical strategy, which is what's so interesting.
Right.
And, that sprawling scope is the rhetorical trap. The author is inadvertently falling right into it.
So by debating all the tangents,
you're validating his structural argument that it's all connected. You're spending all this valuable time debating the facts of the tangent itself instead of proving that the act of bringing it up is the real failure.
So the fix here is to concentrate the energy.
Exactly. To maximize the analytical strength, the author should focus almost exclusively on that core comparison, Renee Good versus Charlie Kirk. That's the whole thing.
And the geopolitical stuff?
Use it, but only as targeted, brief illustrations of Carlson's his tendency to shift focus away from personal accountability.
So if you want to prove he's being dishonest, you don't spend 2 paragraphs on the details of the Gaza conflict.
No, you spend 2 sentences showing how he uses that conflict to distract from the theme of accountability. You analyze the strategy, not the tangent.
Okay, so that whole section on Venezuela.
Instead of debating the death toll of Maduro's supporters, you just use it to hammer the central theme.
Right.
You could pivot so quickly. Something like, Carlson wants us to mourn these lives lost in Venezuela, but he's ignoring the consequences of their choice to support a dictator. Boom, done.
I see. The point isn't about the victims themselves.
No. The point is that Carlson only applies his human lens when it serves his agenda. He just ignores accountability when it doesn't.
Yeah, and that tightens the piece immediately. You're not getting bogged down in a secondary debate that just drains the fire from the primary thesis.
That's it. And the strongest anchor in this whole piece is dismantling that flimsy basis for the Good-Kirk connection.
The part where the author points out that Carlson's only connection is, Charlie got shot in the neck, Renee Good got shot in the face. That's the connection.
Yes, use that. That should be the entire frame for the analysis. A focused piece with just those 2 major examples. Good versus Kirk, and then the flawed human lens on the ICE agent. It would feel so much sharper, more sophisticated, and frankly, more devastating.
That's great advice on scope, but even with that focus, we still have to talk about how the critique is delivered, the style.
Ah, yes, the tone.
The material is incredibly passionate, which is a huge strength, but that passion, sometimes it overshoots. The material's heavy reliance on intensely emotive and dismissive language, it risks alienating readers.
And undermining the credibility of what is, otherwise, a really sharp analysis of accountability.
Yeah, exactly. The author has done all this work to identify the logical inconsistency, but then delivers the conclusion wrapped in a personal insult. I mean, we're seeing these inflammatory ad hominem attacks, calling people like Jasmine Crockett or Tucker Carlson a dingbat or a nut job.
Right. It conveys frustration, for sure, but it replaces strong analysis with just emotional reaction.
And when the author says Nicolas Maduro is scum of a human, the powerful reasoning behind it about accountability for starving his people, it just converts instantly into this subjective, emotional judgment.
And that's the core tension we need to resolve. The author has every right to feel that passion. But if you're writing a piece to change minds or expose hypocrisy, that emotion has to be channeled into precision.
So the suggestion is what? Replace the name-calling?
Replace the inflammatory adjectives and names with precise, analytical descriptions of the rhetorical or logical failure you're seeing.
Okay, but I wonder if the author removes words like lunacy and the personal labels, are we draining the piece of the very fire that made it so compelling? Isn't the point that these people are often behaving like nutjobs?
That's a fair challenge. It really is. And it goes to the heart of persuasion. If the goal is just catharsis for people who already agree, then the emotional language is fine, it works.
But if the goal is to appeal to a wider audience,
Then you need rigor. A logical takedown will always be more convincing than an emotional outburst. You maintain the fire by making the description of the failure stronger than the personal attack.
so keep the strong stance on consequences.
Absolutely. But present it with the objectivity that proves you're operating on logic, not just reaction.
Okay, give me an example. When critiquing Carlson,
Instead of asking how in the world do people still listen to you, focus on analyzing why his appeal to the human lens without any context is, suicidal empathy or just plain intellectual inconsistency.
right, that's a critique of his method, not his person. We're moving from his character to his intellectual output.
Precisely. And for the Good Kirk comparison, you absolutely keep the strong conclusion that the decision was her own damn fault and involved playing stupid games. That's the author's ethical point.
But just remove the surrounding personal stuff.
Right. Elevate the description of the failure. So instead of calling it lunacy, maybe describe it as a rhetorical lapse or a failure of moral distinction.
A deliberate contextual omission.
Yes, perfect. That switch in vocabulary transforms the piece from a passionate rant into genuine analytical criticism, and you don't even sacrifice the core intensity.
That's incredibly actionable. It's like you maintain the venom, but deliver it with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to our third area, which connects right back to this ethical framework of choices and consequences. While the material makes a powerful ethical case for individual accountability, it needs to explicitly integrate the specific factual context of the Renee Good shooting. It needs that to logically defend itself against the charge of being, callous.
This is where we anchor the entire piece. The author is so right that Carlson focuses on the human tragedy, a woman got shot in the face, while just deliberately omitting all the key facts about what she was doing.
But the author's own assertion that her death was her own damn fault, it's potentially vulnerable because the notes show the author knows the deep context of the incident, but they don't layer that context right up front.
And without that factual foundation, the claim was sounding overly broad or unfeeling, which is the exact opposite of the author's intent.
The strength of the argument is in the detail.
It is. And right now, the details are used to support the conclusion later, instead of forming the conclusion from the start.
So the suggestion here is to strengthen the choices have consequences argument.
By creating an unassailable logical boundary between what Good did and the scenario of, say, an innocent bystander.
The author even defines an innocent bystander as someone doing nothing.
Moral calculus is needed here. That's how we move the argument from a philosophical point to a factual conclusion nobody can refute.
So explicitly contrast the innocent bystander with her reported actions.
Hammer them. Hammer the specific fact. She stalked ICE. She refused to exit the car. She revved up the engine. She was speeding up to potentially take him out.
Those actions established this wasn't just some tragic accident with a passive protester.
No, this was an active, aggressive, vehicular engagement with a law enforcement officer. And there's one more detail.
Oh, the essential detail buried in the notes about the ICE agent.
That's the critical piece of information. The author mentioned the agent had been dragged under a car a few months earlier.
That has to be elevated. It has to be right at the top.
It must, because it directly supports the claim that the agent was acting on an immediate, credible fear of death.
It transforms the consequence from just an accident into a predictable consequence.
Yes, given the agent's reasonable expectation of grave harm. It justifies the agent's action and grounds the author's strong language in objective, reported reality.
That single detail, it provides the final logical layer. It makes the accountability argument completely unassailable.
It does. And then you can show how Carlson's failure to mention the agent's trauma or good stalking is a crucial, deliberate omission that just destroys his whole human lens perspective.
It proves his argument is based on deception.
Exact. Anchor the moral stance in those specific, undeniable actions, and the piece becomes logically robust.
This is powerful guidance. Okay, let's recap the main opportunities we identified.
Let's do it.
First, focus the energy. Narrow the scope. Shift away from refuting every tangent on Gaza and Venezuela.
And instead concentrate that intensity on dismantling the core rhetorical failure, that false equivalence between Renee Good and Charlie Kirk.
Use the geopolitical issues only as brief illustrations of Carlson's tendency to distract.
Secondly, temper the tone to bolster credibility. The passion is a gift, but replace the inflammatory name-calling, like dingbat, with more sophisticated analytical language.
Right, call it a failure of moral distinction, not lunacy. Increase your authority and persuasive power.
And finally, logically bolster the case for accountability. Integrate that specific factual context from the shooting.
Use the concrete details you already know. the stalking, revving the engine, and especially the agent's previous trauma to build that unassailable logical boundary.
And justify why this specific loss of life falls squarely under choices have consequences.
The material has incredibly strong core assertions. I mean, it's so deeply knowledgeable.
It really is. By focusing the intensity, narrowing the scope, and refining the language to match the rigor of the argument, this piece will become so much more persuasive and robust. You have an excellent foundation here.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to revise based on these suggestions and submit it back in. We would love to see how you sharpen this excellent core argument into a true analytical powerhouse. That's all the time we have for this critique. Until next time, keep challenging yourself to improve your craft.